I was 17 when I discovered my father had spent the college fund I diligently built, through part-time jobs, birthday gifts, and small odd jobs for the neighbors, on a new SUV. When I confronted him, he shrugged. "We can't support your college. Your brother needs it more. Besides," he added, squaring his shoulders in that self-righteous way of his, "you should be grateful for everything we've already done." In that moment, I remember the day I opened my first savings account at 12 years old, depositing $20 earned from raking leaves. I imagined that money, brick by brick, building a future, only to find it had been pillaged for a sleek gunmetal gray status symbol in Dad's driveway. Dad's betrayal was my first lesson in how some people treat family obligations like expendable currency. He acted like I was at fault for daring to question him. He couldn't fathom that I, the ungrateful daughter, might one day be strong enough, or bold enough, to demand a fair share of her own hard-earned resources. I moved out the day I turned 18, working full-time at a diner before eventually clawing my way to a scholarship. Despite Dad's protests, though not actual financial support, I scraped together tuition and rent. My father's betrayal shaped me. I learned to keep quiet until the time was right. I learned that unspoken strategies can be more powerful than public outrage. And I learned never, ever, to let anyone hold the keys to my future again. Fast forward 15 years. Dad and I had a civil relationship at best. I visited on holidays, said all the right words, but the trust was never the same. And somewhere along the line, I married a man I once believed was the polar opposite of my father. Liam was suave, witty, and promised me the partnership I'd never had at home. When we were dating, he told me stories of how his own family had always favored his older sister, leaving him to fend for himself. I recognized that bone-deep hurt. It made me believe he'd never do to me what my father had done. But as time went on, cracks began to show. Liam's sense of entitlement was cunningly disguised at first. Little complaints about not having the newest phone, the nicest car, the biggest house. A turn of phrase that made me feel guilty if I suggested, maybe we should watch our budget. Looking back, I see the 1,000 pinpricks that should have warned me. But we had a life together, a mortgage, and a business we were co-founding. And I, having survived one betrayal, assumed I'd be ready for any other. I wasn't. Not right away. On a crisp autumn morning, I woke up to an empty bed. My phone screen blinked with a single text from Liam. It read, "I'm leaving you. Already filed for separation. Don't bother calling." Attached was a smug, smiling selfie of him sitting in what looked like a swanky airport lounge, plus a short note. "P.S. The house is in my name. Good luck." I breathed in. Once. Twice. Everything turned icy, but I refused to let myself panic. I glanced around, noticing he'd taken a suitcase. The closet was half empty. The watch I'd bought him for his birthday was gone from the dresser. My mind whirled. Did he think I was so naive, so vulnerable that I would crumble at this? If it were my 17-year-old self discovering Dad's betrayal all over again, I might have screamed or cried or demanded an explanation. Instead, I just set down my phone with a practiced calm, because if there's one thing I had mastered since that day Dad gutted my future, it was how to endure betrayal without letting it break me. Sometimes, the best reaction is the one people least expect. No outward reaction at all. I didn't call Liam. I didn't text him either. The silence, I knew, would unsettle him more than tears or accusations. Even if my heart pounded like a war drum, my posture remained straight. I had learned to keep a collected exterior while I lined up my next moves. My father's betrayal had taught me the importance of self-reliance. So, as soon as Liam and I started living together, I'd insisted on maintaining some private accounts. Not because I didn't trust him then, at least not consciously, but more because that teenage voice inside me never died. I kept my finances separate, stashing away a percentage of each paycheck, fully aware that joint accounts, big purchases, and mortgages could complicate matters. I never told Liam about that private nest egg. Honestly, he never bothered to ask. He seemed almost too confident that he held all the cards. His arrogance also meant that, when we co-founded our small online retail business, Liam never took the time to read all the fine print in our partnership agreement. He let me handle the legal details, busying himself with the visionary aspects of the company. He was the flamboyant face while I quietly ensured the backbone was stable. He never guessed I'd structured the partnership in a way that prevented him from claiming full ownership without my consent. The brand name, intellectual property rights, and software licenses were all in my name. We had a mortgage in his name, sure. That was something I'd had concerns about, but ultimately, I agreed to it because of his better credit score at the time. However, I'd made sure that the property deed was assigned in a way that recognized both of our contributions. And I had every bank statement and receipt to prove it. On top of that, I'd forged quiet professional alliances. I was friendly with our accountant, Carolyn, and had found honest connections with a couple of our top clients. Some even confided in me that they found Liam's constant bravado off-putting. Little by little, I'd gathered documentation that showed my legitimate ownership stake in business operations. Hard facts. Clean evidence. It felt vindicating to know I had laid the groundwork for my own protection, less because I'd fully anticipated a betrayal this spectacular, and more because my father's actions had taught me caution. Now that caution was about to pay off. I didn't hear from Liam for almost a week. Then I got an email. Subject: divorce terms. From Liam to me. Hey, I'm willing to settle this amicably, but let's be real. You're not going to have much leverage here. I'm keeping the house. I know you can't afford it on your own. Also, regarding the business, I expect a severance for giving up my share. $150,000. Minimum. Yes, you read that right. I built that business from the ground up, so that's just a fraction of its worth. And I'll be nice. I'll let you keep the car. It's got a bunch of miles on it anyway. If you don't agree, it'll get messy, fast. Trust me, you don't want to go toe-to-toe with me legally. Liam. I almost laughed. He was so confident he could bulldoze me with a few keystrokes. I pictured the old me, naive and quick to show anger, but I'd grown into someone else entirely, someone who understood that real power rarely needs to bluster. I drafted a reply in my mind, something gracious, something that feigned confusion and fear. Then I thought better of it and opted for stony silence. My attorney would speak for me soon enough. Liam's first real shock arrived a week later, when his credit card was declined at a luxe hotel in France. He'd posted a picture from Paris on social media. I kept tabs discreetly. He must have realized something had changed. That something was, of course, that I'd reported him to the bank for unauthorized charges on our joint card. He had paid for his flight and that hotel deposit on the joint account. After he told me in writing, he'd already filed for separation. My attorney's letter to the bank documented the questionable timing. The bank froze our joint account pending an investigation into misuse of marital assets. Liam then discovered that the business funds, beyond what we used for operating expenses, had never been sitting in his or a joint account. By agreement, they were in a business account solely under my name. He found out the hard way when he tried to make an online transfer to himself. The website locked him out. He probably phoned our accountant, Caroline, only to learn that her instructions came from me alone. I pictured him sputtering angrily across the ocean, firing off outraged texts and emails. None of them came to me, though. Not yet. That alone told me he was afraid I might have more leverage than he'd ever assumed. He was scrambling behind the scenes, doing damage control with the clients he used to brag to. I couldn't help but feel a dark satisfaction. This was the payoff for years of quietly making sure my name was on every major asset I'd built or contributed to. For not letting my father's betrayal go unanswered all those years ago, teaching me the harshest lesson. Be ready for the worst. After a furious 2 weeks, Liam apparently decided he'd come back from Europe to face me in person. At least that's what he put in an email, though it reeked of the false bravado that had become his signature. He proposed a meeting at the house. No attorneys, just us. Probably he thought he could corner me, bully me into compliance without a legal safety net present. I set the time for a Saturday afternoon, broad daylight, so that any attempt on his part to intimidate me would be less likely to escalate. My father's betrayal never taught me to run from conflict. It taught me to plan for it better. When I arrived, he was already in the living room, leaning against the staircase with an air of triumph. As always, he assumed he commanded the space. Sunlight slanted through the large front windows, highlighting his smirk. "You finally come home," Liam said, as if it had been his home all along. "Nice of you to show up." I blinked slowly, letting silence hang. "This is hardly your home, Liam." He barked a laugh. "Oh? The mortgage is in my name. You're the one who's going to have to leave eventually." I stepped into the living room. Familiar furniture loomed around us. Pieces we'd collected, ironically, at estate sales. I let my eyes travel across the walls. Then I took a seat on the couch, crossing my ankles calmly. "You should reread the property deed," I said lightly, "and our prenuptial agreement." His confidence faltered, if only for a second. Prenuptial? We never signed a prenup," he scoffed. But behind his voice, I could sense uncertainty. I nodded, trying to keep my tone matter of fact. "We did. You don't recall? Signed right after we set up the business structure. That's separate from a standard prenup, I'll admit. It's more of a business partnership overlay, but the effect is much the same. In short, since I founded the brand name, the software, and hold majority ownership, you can't claim what doesn't belong to you." He stared. "You're bluffing." I gave a small shrug, as though this bored me. "Check with your attorney, or better yet, mine." His face reddened. "You can't keep the house out of my hands. It's in my name." I raised my eyebrows. "But your name alone doesn't mean you hold all the equity. You may recall I've contributed more than half the down payment, and the documentation is in a folder with my attorney. The mortgage might be in your name, but if you default, the bank comes after you. That doesn't magically give you full ownership. Additionally, I have the receipts from when I paid for the renovations. Kitchen, bathrooms." I flicked my gaze around. "You'd be shocked at how many improvements I bankrolled." He opened his mouth to counter, but I continued. "I'm sure your attorney explained that the minute you left the country and used marital assets, our joint credit, on a personal trip while sending me a separation announcement, you gave me the right to freeze those accounts. If you want to fight me in court, go ahead. You'll see how that $150,000 severance you mentioned in your email is going to dry up." Liam's jaw tensed. "I never realized you were this ruthless." A dryness crept into my voice. "Is it ruthless to safeguard what's mine? I learned that if you don't do it, someone else will take it." He had the gall to snort. "Don't tell me this is all about your dad. God, you keep everything locked down because you're still that bitter teenager." I cut in, calm as a winter sky. "I learned from him, yes. But this is about you. You betrayed me. Did you think I'd just crumble? Let you walk away with everything we built? Everything I built? And then wait for you to toss me scraps? That was your father's story, not mine." He stared, uncomprehending. The confidence was draining from him in real time. Then, in a last-ditch effort, he stepped forward, brandishing a piece of paper. I have a buyer lined up for the business, he lied. They're offering way more than you might think. We can both walk away with a profit. All you have to do is sign over your half. He tried to push the document into my hand, expecting me to snatch at the possibility. Instead, I didn't even glance at it. I stood, brushed imaginary dust from my lap, and said, "No thanks. I'm not selling my share. And you never had a share to begin with, not in the way you think. You can try to sell your supposed stake, but you'll quickly find no legitimate buyer wants to purchase a fraction of a company you don't actually control." Something in his eyes flickered. True fear. It must have finally dawned on him that I'd had a plan all along. Over the next 2 months, Liam's unraveling was both swift and painfully drawn out, like a slow-motion car crash. I heard from mutual acquaintances that he'd tried to get quick cash from questionable investors, claiming he had a profitable online store to sell. He was laughed out of offices once people read the paperwork or discovered the brand was legally mine. Financial troubles piled on him. With every passing week, the bank pressed him to keep up with the mortgage. He hadn't realized that once I cut off our joint accounts, he'd be solely responsible for all payments on a house he couldn't occupy, because by leaving so abruptly, he'd forfeited immediate access and had to go through the legal system to even step back on the property. Soon he was forced to move back in with his older sister, the one he used to swear had taken everything from him. He called me multiple times, but I let them go unanswered. Occasionally, he'd send a text, vacillating between threats and pleasantries. "You can't do this to me." "I'm sorry. Let's just talk. Talk to me or I'll ruin your reputation." I screenshot every message, forwarded them to my attorney, documented everything. Meanwhile, he was humiliated socially too. The circle of friends that once admired him for his flamboyance was quick to desert him when it became clear he had no more flashy dinners or fancy trips to offer. He tried to defame me online, claiming I was a conniving partner who'd stolen his business. But the details, the paper trail, and the actual brand registration all pointed to me. He couldn't outrun cold, hard facts. I'd be lying if I said I never felt satisfaction, but mostly I felt relief. The last few years with Liam had been stifling. I was always deflecting his demands for bigger, flashier, better. Now I was free to run my business my way. Clients who'd been on the fence were excited to work with me directly, praising my professionalism. The brand thrived under a new marketing campaign I launched, a far cry from the ego-driven antics Liam used to push. Financially, I soared. But it wasn't the money that made me feel truly triumphant. It was the independence. The knowledge that my future didn't hinge on someone else's whims. The intangible empowerment of waking up each morning, knowing that no one could undercut me with a single text message or a stolen savings account. The final piece of the puzzle happened when my father made a surprise call. We weren't close, but we spoke intermittently. He found out through the family grapevine that I was divorcing Liam. Perhaps Dad expected me to ask for help, or maybe gloat about how I'd learned from him. Instead, I listened politely. He asked if he could see me. Possibly he wanted to talk about my younger brother's new business venture and how Dad was investing in it. I suppressed a wry smile. Some patterns never changed. Still, I agreed to a coffee meetup. We sat in a cozy cafe near my new townhouse. Yes, I'd sold the old house, recouped my portion, and used the profits to move somewhere with a smaller mortgage and a bigger sense of peace. Dad looked older than I remembered, but there was still that glint of control in his eye. "I heard you're going through a tough time," he said solemnly, as if this were brand new information. I shrugged. "Not really. Divorce is stressful, sure, but I'm doing well." He raised an eyebrow. "Could have fooled me. Didn't Liam up and leave? I bet he took everything. I warned you about men like that." He adopted a paternal tone, the one that used to send me bristling as a teen. "You know, if you need any help, I can—" I sipped my coffee, interrupting him gently. "Dad, I appreciate the concern, but no, he didn't take everything. I have my business. I'm financially sound." He blinked, obviously flummoxed. "But the mortgage, the house, I thought he—" Smiling calmly, I repeated, "I'm fine." He paused, digesting this. "Well, good then." He cleared his throat awkwardly. "Your brother might need some help with his startup, though. If you could spare a loan." My lips curved faintly at the memory of him raiding my savings. It was tempting to lash out, but I'd learned that true power doesn't need petty retribution. "I can't help him, Dad," I said. "I have responsibilities of my own. I'm sure you understand." He stiffened. "Are you refusing to help your own brother?" I met his eyes. "I'm saying no, that's all." Then I calmly returned to my coffee. In that moment, I realized I had changed more than I'd ever admitted to myself. I used to cling to the hope that my father would finally see my worth. Now, I saw clearly that his approval was irrelevant. I'd forged a life and a future no one could seize. My father's expression soured, but he said nothing more. Without a word, I rose, paid for my own coffee. My father hurriedly tried to protest, but I insisted, and walked out into the midday sun, feeling lighter than ever. A few weeks later, the divorce settlement was finalized. Liam walked away with a fraction of what he'd demanded. Even that was mostly to avoid further litigation. He'd forced the mortgage onto his own shoulders, having insisted it remain in his name. He was forced to sell the property at a loss just to keep the creditors off his back. Meanwhile, I kept the business, the car, and my personal savings. Untouched. Secure. In the final hearing, I sat across from him at a conference table, my attorney at my side. Liam looked disheveled, as if he'd aged a decade in a few months. When the mediator announced the resolution, Liam glanced up at me, his eyes full of regret and a hint of desperation. I gave a small, polite nod, revealing no more emotion than that. Afterward, he shuffled out of the room, shoulders sagging. It was an odd, hollow victory. Once upon a time, I'd loved him. Now the only thing I felt was acceptance. When you grow up learning the cost of betrayal, you understand that real triumph doesn't come from watching someone else suffer. It comes from knowing they can no longer hurt you, and that you stand taller, stronger, for having survived. That evening I sat in my new townhouse office, finalizing a contract with a major retailer. The business was about to explode in ways Liam never bothered to imagine, thanks to his narrow focus on luxury rather than sustainability. I emailed Caroline to thank her for her diligent accounting, then opened a note-taking app to scribble down my thoughts. I typed, "It's over, and I'm free. No one can hold me back." And I owe it all, in part, to the lesson I learned at 17. If you say nothing and prepare, those who call you ungrateful will never see you coming. I closed my laptop and took a deep breath, letting a smile settle. Outside, dusk was giving way to a clear sky. Maybe, in another world, I might have confronted my father at the time, screamed until my throat was raw. Maybe, in a different version of my marriage, I would have yelled at Liam for his arrogance. But I had learned that my greatest strength lay not in fiery displays, but in quiet, deliberate strategy. From a broken teenager scraping for tuition money to a woman in control of her destiny, I'd forged my own path. Everyone who tried to claim I was ungrateful had come to realize one thing too late. I wasn't ungrateful. I was simply done letting others define my worth. As the stars emerged, I felt a deep contentment. My father would go on being the man he always was. Liam, too, would bear the consequences of his overconfidence. But me, I had a life to lead, a life that belonged wholly to myself. And I wouldn't have it any other way.